Hey yo, it's Gluke. Welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about how to get that low end smacking so clean. Let's go. All right, welcome back. This was another highly requested video topic that I cover about low-end mixes and how to get them clean. And in order to do that, we need to know what we're talking about. So here, I've made this chart that shows us on an EQ8 in Ableton where all of the different frequency bands are. Now, this isn't exact, but the main two we're going to be focusing on and we want to pay attention to when we're talking about our low end in our mix is going to be the lows, obviously, and the low mids. We also have our mids and our highs, but these won't play as big of a factor in our mix as our low mids because our low mids are sitting directly above the lows, and since our ears can't actually hear this frequency range, these frequencies are going to determine how our ears perceive those sounds. One last thing before we get into Ableton that we need to talk about, and that is where on the keyboard we can play in our bass to make sure that we have good low end. So if you've done any research online about this topic, you've probably seen somewhere that you're not supposed to play below F, or F is the lowest or the best note for sub or whatever. Don't think about it like a cliff that we drive off of at F. It's really more of a hill. So F0, 0 being the octave, is going to be the most resonant frequency in the sub region. And that doesn't mean it's going to be the loudest or the best. That just means that it's going to have the best frequency response based on the subwoofers. So from F0 to C0, we can still play all of these notes, but they're going to get lower and lower, obviously. And right around C0 is when it stops sounding like a note and just more like the speaker kind of moving. We don't really want to go below C0. Now in the other direction, from F0 to about C1, we can still play all of these notes and they will mostly be in the sub region. But right about at C1 is where we're going to start to consider anything above that as a low mid, and we'll treat it as such. Okay, so now that we've touched on all of that, let's get into my tips for how to get a nice, clean low end. So the first tip is obviously going to be keep it simple. When I'm talking about keeping it simple, at its face value, it's kind of a no-brainer. Obviously, the less things that you have to juggle in a mix, the better. When it comes to sub in particular, we only want one thing playing in the sub at a time. The very first counter argument to that should be really obvious is that we need a bass line and a kick. The first and easiest way you can help lock in the low end on your mix is to sidechain your bass against the kick. So to sidechain, we would use a compressor. And this is just a volume automation tool. One of the ways that you can use this is by sidechaining it to something else. And this is really the root of that classic EDM like pumpy sound that you hear. But what we're telling it to do essentially in this menu here is we're telling it to listen to the kick channel. And then we bring the threshold down so that every time the kick plays and passes this threshold, the signal is going to be reduced by a proportionate amount. I'll give a drastic example of sidechain here. Somewhere around there is going to sound pretty good. There's no exact science to what you should do about your threshold level or anything like that. These are all going to be artistic choices, but sidechaining and making sure that the volume is ducking when the kick happens is the main point of what I'm trying to say here. So when the kick plays, the kick is in the sub, and then when the bass plays, the bass is in the sub. Now, with regards to sound design, keeping it simple means trying to limit the amount of channels that you have that are playing in the sub, so that way you have less things to fix and tune to the mix. So in this example here, I've made an FM bass and operator. If I turn off the FM layers, it's pretty much just sub. And if you're listening on headphones or a phone, something without that much sub, you probably won't be able to hear this. But when I turn on the FM layers, we can hear the full patch come together. And the reason that this patch works is because we're playing in the sub region and these FMs are buzzing higher harmonics for us, but we still have that sub information, so we don't need to do anything else to this. And we can check the spectrum and see that we do in fact have sub on this instrument. So when it comes to your bass sound design stuff, you typically want the shape of the spectrum to look something like this, where the sub is the loudest part, and then there's some mid-range stuff, and then maybe there's some high-range stuff. But I mean, really anything past about here is not going to matter or have that much of an effect on your actual sub signal. So now if I play it without the sidechain, we can hear what it sounds like when there's two things playing in the sub at the same time. And you can hear that on the kick, these bass notes start to get a little squashed. So that is why we'll use sidechain to move it out of the way. So that is the first tip, is just keeping it really, really simple, making sure that you have low cut all of the things that aren't playing in the sub or don't need to be playing in the sub, because sometimes they may have extra signals. You might hear online that if you low cut everything that you're going to have phase buildup in a certain range. Don't worry about that. As long as you can get the music to sound like how you want, that's the most important thing about working on music in the computer. So now we're ready for tip number 2, and that's going to be focus on the main idea. For this one, I'm going to show you an example where we do use a sub that is different than the main bass sound, but it might not be in a way that you would anticipate. So this is my song, You Still Have to Keep Dancing. I'll go ahead and play it really quick and decide in your head what is the bass noise.
Keep dancing.
3, 2, 1, big reveal. In this song, I made this little noise in operator, and this is the bass sound. If we go ahead and solo it here, there's that one, and then there's this one. When I was making these in operator, I wasn't paying any attention to the low end because I needed that mid and low mid information off of these. And then when it came time to make the sub, making a sub do 1/24th notes was really difficult and just not worth the time. And I thought I could do something a bit more interesting. So instead of trying to match the sub exactly to what this was doing, instead what I did was I cut the lows out of it and I made another patch in operator and did a little pitch automation. And so this is what the actual sub sounds like. And it's just that the entire time. It does not change at all. And so what I'm really trying to emphasize here is that if your song has a bass line and it's sort of a bass pluck like the first project that we showed here, then you're going to want to make sure that the sub follows that idea. But in this case, the idea was having this, wickety-wockety noise on display. And so in order to supplement that main idea, I chose a really simple sub so that this could really come through and shine well. When it comes to deciding if you need a sub or you don't need a sub, the first thing you should do is try to see if you can get sub out of the main idea. And if you can't, then just duplicate the patch and set that synth to a sine wave and just have that be the sub, and you can stack them together. So this is the project that we've been working on for the past few weeks in this series. In this bass patch here, I had to make a sub because when I was making the original distorted idea for this, I was using inverted sine waves and I didn't realize it, and so there was no sub coming out, but I got the sizzle and sort of the body of the sound out of that main patch. This is what it sounded like when I went to play it. Now this sounds like a distorted bass, but if I pull up the spectrum, look at that. The sub is not the loudest part of that signal. So that indicated to me that I needed to add another sub. So what I did first was I cut the lows off of this because there really wasn't anything to cut to begin with. And now it'll sound like this. This is where the low mid information is going to sit. And here is the sub that I exported. And as you can see, it is just a sine wave. But with these two together, now it sounds like this. We've essentially created a bass, but by putting these two layers together. I also added a third layer just for a bit more top-end movement, but altogether, this is what it sounds like. You just want to make sure that you're really supporting the main idea by using sub as a tool to emphasize that. Just keep it simple, back to the first rule, and you'll be good to go. Now, my final piece of advice is going to be trust your ears/devices. In this example here, I could tell that this main patch was missing something, and when I pulled up the spectrum and saw that there wasn't that much sub, I knew that I needed to add some more sub in order to get the sound that I was really looking for here. You can also interpret this rule as just going with your gut instead of just praying that you'll have sub when you play it on a loud system. The easiest way to check, obviously, is just with a spectrum. So if we go back to the first project here, if I didn't have an actual subwoofer in my studio and I wanted to make sure that the low end sounded good, what I would recommend you do is use headphones and then go onto your main channel and add an EQ8 and set one of the points to be a low pass and bring this all the way down to about 120. And what you should be able to do is differentiate between when the kick is playing and when the bass is playing. And if you can hear those clearly in this region of the EQ, the rest of it will be fine. Just by doing this simple trick, you'll really be able to tell if the clarity in your low end is where it needs to be. And if not, just low pass what you're using and try to add a sub. Okay, now the final piece of advice that I'm going to have is just buy a sub. Now, obviously, if you are producing on a budget, this is going to be quite difficult. But as long as you're doing these first 3 tips, you really don't need a sub. But if you do have a sub, the easiest way to tell if you have a clean low end is by putting your foot on it, literally just touching the sub. Because with sub frequencies, we're not necessarily hearing them, we're more so feeling them. By physically touching the sub, you'll be able to feel the rumble of the sub and be able to adjust it according to what you're looking for. So I wanted to keep this video simple because it's easy to go down a rabbit hole with this topic. When it comes to getting really precise with your low end, and if you really have to go in the weeds and fix a lot of really niche stuff, chances are it's just going to be easier to start over with your low end. And so just try low cutting everything and adding a sub where it needs to go. But I hope that this video has sort of demystified how to get a clean low end. As always, be sure to like and subscribe, bro. Make sure you ring the bell so you know when I post new videos, and we'll see you in the next one.